The sheer audacity of my mother-in-law. She moved into my house while I was in the hospital having my baby. My name is Ashley. I am 33 years old. I live in Dallas, Texas, and 11 months ago I spent 3 days in the hospital giving birth to my daughter, and came home to find that my mother-in-law had moved her belongings into my guest room, rearranged my kitchen, replaced my living room curtains, and left a casserole on the counter with a note that said, "Welcome home, I am staying to help." She had not asked. She had not called. She had taken the key my husband kept for emergencies, and she had moved in while I was in labor. My daughter's name is Lily. She is 10 months old, and she has never known a version of coming home from the hospital that did not involve her grandmother in the guest room without an invitation. My mother-in-law's name is Linda. She is 64 years old, and she has always had opinions about how things should be done, and has always expressed those opinions with the confidence of someone who expects implementation rather than discussion. My husband's name is Ryan. He had known Linda was coming. He had not told me because he had believed, incorrectly and without asking me, that I would be glad for the help, and that telling me while I was in labor was poor timing, and that not telling me at all until I came home was somehow better. I stood in my own living room 3 days postpartum looking at curtains I had not chosen, and a casserole I had not requested, and a guest room containing my mother-in-law's suitcases, and I felt something that postpartum hormones and 3 days of labor, and the specific violation of coming home to a changed house made extremely difficult to manage calmly. I managed it as calmly as I could. I asked Ryan to step outside with me. I told Ryan in the specific quiet voice of someone who is choosing words very carefully that Linda needed to go to a hotel. Ryan said she had come to help. I said I understood she had come to help. I said I understood she had come to help, and that she could help from a hotel, and that our home required an invitation to occupy, and that she had not been given one. Ryan said she had already unpacked. I said she could repack. Linda went to a hotel the following day. She was hurt. She told Ryan I had been ungrateful. Ryan told her that what she had been done without asking, and that the not asking was the problem regardless of the intention. Linda stayed in the hotel for 5 days and helped during the day, and went back to the hotel at night, and this arrangement was functional and respectful, and everything her moving into my guest room without asking had not been. She went home after 2 weeks. The curtains she had replaced are gone. I removed them the day after she left and put my original curtains back. The casserole was actually good. I have not told her it was good because some information is not required to be shared. Update: 3 months later. Linda came to visit last month and asked before she came whether she could stay in our guest room. I said yes because she had asked. She was here for 4 days and she was helpful, and she did not rearrange anything, and she did not replace any curtains, and on the last day she held Lily for 2 hours and sang to her, and I sat across the room and watched my daughter be loved by her grandmother, and I thought about the casserole and the curtains and the hotel, and about how much difference asking makes, and about how asking had been available the whole time, and had simply not been used until it was required. The guest room is hers when she asks. The curtains are mine always. I started getting calls from my own number. When I finally answered, what I heard made me call the police. My name is Jennifer. I am 36 years old. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and 14 months ago I started receiving phone calls from my own number. Not spoofed numbers that were close to mine. My exact number. The first call I did not answer because I assumed it was a technical error. The second call I declined. The third call arrived at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I sat in my bed, and I looked at my own number on my screen for 30 seconds, and then I answered. The voice on the other end was automated. Not a robocall, automated, something that sounded like a voice recording that had been manipulated or distorted. It said my name. My first and last name. Then it said an address. My address. Then it said we are watching. I ended the call and sat in my bedroom with my phone, and I understood that what had just happened was something I needed to document before I did anything else. I screenshot the call log. I recorded the time. I wrote down the exact words that had been said in the order they had been said. Then I called the police. The non-emergency line at 2 a.m. connected me to an officer who took a report and told me to document any further calls, and to contact them again if the calls continued or escalated. The calls continued. Over the following 3 weeks I received 11 more calls from my own number at irregular hours. The content of each call was similar: my name, my address, occasionally a reference to something specific about my routine that told me whoever was doing this had some knowledge of my daily patterns. I hired a cybersecurity consultant named Thomas who specialized in phone security and spoofing. Thomas traced the technical origin of the calls, not to my number, obviously, but to a service that had been used to spoof my number, and that had a registration pattern. He was able to narrow to a geographic area, and eventually to a specific account. The account was connected to an ex-boyfriend named Daniel who I had ended a relationship with 14 months earlier, and who had apparently not processed the ending in any healthy way. The police investigation took 6 weeks. Daniel was charged with criminal harassment and stalking. He had been using the spoof calls as part of a broader pattern of monitoring that included driving past my building and accessing a data broker service that had my personal information. The case was resolved through a plea agreement that included a restraining order, probation, and mandatory counseling. I changed my phone number. I changed my building entry codes. I installed security cameras at my apartment door. I have thought many times about the 2 a.m. call, and about answering it, and about the specific decision to document before acting, and about how documentation had been the thing that made everything that followed possible. Thomas told me that the decision to write down the exact words in the exact order immediately after the call had given investigators something that call logs alone would not have provided. I write things down now as a general practice. I have learned that what you record in the moment is different from what you remember later, and that the difference matters. Update: 4 months later. Daniel's restraining order expires next year. My attorney has already prepared the documentation for renewal, and has advised me on the process. I have maintained my security measures and added a check-in system with 2 friends who know to flag if they do not hear from me at agreed intervals. It is a small system, and I hope I never need it to matter. Thomas told me when we concluded our work together that I had been unusually methodical for someone in a frightening situation, and that the methodology had made his job significantly easier. I told him I had been scared, and that being scared had made me more careful rather than less because careful felt like the only available form of control. He said that was a useful response to fear. I said I had not chosen it consciously, but that I was glad it had been the response I had. My coworker had the audacity to submit my resignation letter for me. She wanted my job and thought she had found a way to get it. My name is Michelle. I am 34 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and 10 months ago I arrived at work on a Monday morning to find that my access badge did not work, and that the receptionist looked at me with the specific expression of someone who has information they are not sure how to deliver. My access had been deactivated because my employer had received what they believed was my resignation letter, effective the previous Friday, submitted by email from what appeared to be my work account. I had not resigned. I had not written a resignation letter. I had not been aware that any resignation letter existed until my badge did not work at 8:47 a.m. on a Monday. My coworker's name is Sandra. She had been in the same department as me for 2 years and had been passed over for a promotion 6 months earlier that I had received, and had apparently been managing her feelings about that in ways that had escalated over the following months into what I was now standing in the lobby understanding had been a plan. Sandra had created an email account that was 1 character different from my work email. She had sent a resignation letter to HR from that account on Friday afternoon at 4:52 p.m. close enough to end of day that the slight email address difference had not been caught in the initial processing. I spent 40 minutes in the lobby with HR reconstructing what had happened. The email address discrepancy became visible the moment anyone looked at it carefully. My actual work email and the sending address were compared. They were not the same. HR pulled Sandra into a meeting while I was still in the lobby. Sandra was terminated that afternoon. I returned to my desk at approximately 11 a.m. My access had been restored. My manager apologized for the morning. I told her it had not been her error to apologize for. I told her I would like a written confirmation that my employment had been continuous and uninterrupted through the morning's events, and that no resignation had been accepted. The written confirmation was provided within the hour. I have it in a folder. Sandra sent me a LinkedIn message 2 months after her termination. It said she had been going through a difficult time and hoped I would understand. I read it once. I have not responded. Some messages do not require a response, and this was one of them. Update: 3 months later. My manager told me last month that Sandra had applied for a position at a partner firm and had listed our company as a reference. Our company's HR policy on references allows only confirmation of dates of employment and title. No qualitative information, no reason for separation. Sandra received a confirmation of dates. What she did not receive was the qualitative endorsement that the partner firm was apparently looking for. The partner firm hired someone else. I know this because a colleague at the partner firm mentioned it in passing, and I connected the timeline. I did not ask for details. I did not need details. I had my written confirmation of continuous employment, and Sandra had confirmation of her dates, and the distance between those two documents felt like exactly the right distance. I found out my landlord had been entering my apartment without notice for 6 months. The camera I installed caught everything. My name is David. I am 31 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington. And 16 months ago I installed a small security camera inside my apartment door, because I had noticed things being slightly out of place over several months. Not dramatically, nothing missing, but small things. A chair moved. A cabinet left slightly open that I always closed. My desk items in slightly different positions. I had attributed these things to my own absent-mindedness until the 4th or 5th time, and had begun to pay closer attention to the specific positions of specific items before I left the apartment each day. The camera confirmed what I had been noticing. My landlord's name was Frank. He was 58 years old, and he had been entering my apartment during the hours I was at work approximately once every 2 to 3 weeks for at least 6 months. The camera footage showed him using a key, entering, spending between 15 and 40 minutes inside, and leaving before I returned. He was not doing repairs. There was no maintenance request, no work being done. He was walking through my apartment, looking at my things, opening drawers, sitting in my chair. The footage was the most unsettling thing I had viewed in my adult life, and I want to be honest about that because the specific violation of someone being in your private space repeatedly without your knowledge is something that does not fully translate into description. I downloaded 6 weeks of footage. I contacted an attorney named Patricia who specialized in tenant rights, and who told me that what the footage showed was a legal entry in violation of Washington state's landlord-tenant law, which requires 48 hours notice except in genuine emergencies. She also told me it was potentially criminal under Washington's trespass statutes. I filed a complaint with the Seattle Office of Housing. I filed a police report. I sent Frank a formal notice through Patricia's office citing the footage and the legal violations, and demanding immediate cessation of any unauthorized entry and compensation for the violation of my privacy and quiet enjoyment of the premises. Frank's response through his own attorney claimed the entries had been for routine inspections. Washington law requires written notice for routine inspections. He had provided none. The legal process took 5 months. Frank was found in violation of the Landlord-Tenant Act. He was required to pay statutory damages plus my attorney fees. The criminal matter resulted in a trespass finding and a requirement for him to have no contact with any current tenants without written notice. I moved out at the end of my lease not because I was required to, but because living in a space where I knew that had happened was something I chose not to continue. My new apartment has a camera inside the door. It has recorded nothing unusual in 14 months. I consider that 14 months of nothing unusual to be one of the better results available. Update: 4 months later. 2 of Frank's other tenants contacted me after the legal proceedings became a matter of record. Both of them had noticed similar small displacements in their apartments and had attributed them to their own absent-mindedness. One of them installed a camera after contacting me. Her footage showed Frank entering her apartment twice in 3 weeks. She filed her own complaint. Frank's rental license was suspended pending review. I received a message from the Seattle Office of Housing informing me that my original complaint had contributed to a broader investigation. I did not need the message to feel that the right things had been done. But the message was good to receive, and I received it as the thing it was: documentation that paying attention and recording what you notice matters in ways you cannot always predict from the moment of noticing. My new neighbor knew things about me that I had never told anyone in the building. It took me 3 months to understand how my name is Laura. I am 38 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and 18 months ago a new neighbor moved into the apartment across the hall from mine. And within 2 weeks of his arrival began making references to things about my life that I had not shared with anyone in the building, and that I had not been able to explain until 3 months later, when I found out how he knew them. His name is Marcus. He moved in on a Saturday in March. He introduced himself in the hallway on Monday, and was pleasant and normal in every way that I could identify. By the end of his first week he had mentioned in passing that I must be tired from my long work hours. I had been working long hours, but I had not told him this. The following week he mentioned that he liked the same coffee shop I went to every morning. I had not mentioned my coffee shop. The week after that he asked how my sister was doing. I had not mentioned my sister to him. I had not mentioned anything about my personal life to Marcus. We were hallway acquaintances who had spoken 3 times for a total of perhaps 12 minutes. I began documenting the references. Each one I wrote down. The date, what he said, what information it assumed I had shared that I had not shared. Over 3 months I documented 14 references that I could not explain through any normal channel. I told a colleague about the situation. She asked if I had checked my social media privacy settings. I had. She asked if I had a smart speaker. I did. I asked her what she meant. She told me about a documented vulnerability in older smart speaker firmware that could, under specific conditions, allow audio to be transmitted beyond its intended range. A vulnerability that security researchers had identified and that manufacturers had patched, but that required users to update their firmware manually. I had not updated my firmware. My smart speaker was an older model. Marcus was in an apartment across a hallway with shared wall infrastructure. The conditions for the vulnerability were not impossible. I contacted a tech security consultant named Thomas, the same Thomas who had helped a friend of mine with a phone security issue, and he assessed my smart speaker and my network. He found that my speaker's firmware was 18 months out of date, and that there were 2 additional network vulnerabilities in my buildings. Shared Wi-Fi infrastructure that created the conditions the documented vulnerability required. He updated everything and hardened my network settings. The references from Marcus stopped after the 3rd month, which was also the month I had updated everything, though I cannot be entirely certain the timing was causal rather than coincidental. I reported the situation to my building management, and to Thomas's recommendation to the relevant consumer electronics oversight body. Marcus moved out 4 months after he had moved in. He gave no explanation to building management that was shared with me. I do not know if he understood that I had figured out the mechanism, or if his departure was unrelated. What I know is that he is gone and that I update all of my device firmware on the 1st of every month, and that I have a smart speaker that is always current, and a network that Thomas described as appropriately hardened for a residential environment, and that the hallway outside my apartment has been quiet and unremarkable for 14 months. And that unremarkable is exactly what I need it to be. Update, 3 months later. Thomas presented the findings from my case at a residential security conference last month, anonymized, with my permission. He said the case had illustrated a category of vulnerability that was underreported, because most people who experienced unexplained information disclosure attributed it to their own memory of conversations, rather than to a technical mechanism. I told him that was exactly what I had done for 2 months before I started documenting. He said the documentation had been what made the technical investigation possible, and that without it there would have been nothing to connect the references to a timeline that made the vulnerability plausible. I said I had started documenting because I could not explain what was happening, and writing things down was how I managed unexplained things. He said that was a very good reason to write things down. I said I had learned that unexplained things deserve records, and that the records sometimes explain themselves given enough time.